The president wants to spy on 200 million Americans without a warrant. Has he read this document, which he was sworn to uphold?
Now, I will not have you libel Abraham Lincoln.
I don't understand the problem with registering guns. We register cars.
Mark Levine brings you the news the government doesn't want you to know.
Today, an explosive story about connections between white supremacists and Islamic terrorists.
When there's a conflict between Scalia's conservative values and the Constitution of the United States, he throws away the Constitution.
When we do have secret prisons, that is not what America's all about.
Let's go to Mark in 5, 4, 3, 2.
Good evening, America. Good evening, Virginia. Welcome to the Inside Scoop. I'm your host, Mark Levine. It's an exciting day in the Commonwealth of Virginia. The election for Attorney General at one point got so close today that Mark Herring and Mark Obenshain were within 17 votes. Well, now it appears Mark Herring has pulled away, at least for now. Current count has the Democratic candidate ahead by 116 votes. But provisional ballots are still to be counted, and there's a lot of controversy already right here in Fairfax County, Virginia. Mostly over which ballots are counted, who gets which tables, where should the lawyers be, should the lawyers even be there at all. And the media, which ignored the race when Obenshain was 1,200 votes ahead of Herring, is now watching every detail. And the two people sitting to my left have been watching all of the details. Let me introduce Bettina Lawton. She's the host of Inside Scoop Virginia. She does a very good job giving Commonwealth politics every other week right here on this station. And she will introduce her guest to the left.
To my left is Mark Greitinger. He is a Maryland attorney, but he lives in Virginia, and he is on the Fairfax County Democrats election protection team. He's one of the lawyers who is representing us in our lawsuit that we filed a year ago against the State Board of Elections, and has been working very closely on the canvass that's going on right now.
Pleasure to be here, Mark. Bettina?
You know, all three of us here are lawyers, so I think it's probably fair if I go ahead and criticize all the lawyers, because none of the three of us will take it personally. It appears that the lawyers, quote unquote, have already been the source of controversy in Fairfax County. The Fairfax State Board of Elections, which at its heart is run by the current Attorney General, Ken Cuccinelli, the guy who ran and lost the race for governor just last week, has said that lawyers cannot represent voters who are going in to get their provisional ballots. The voters have to appear themselves, changing a Fairfax County practice. Maybe the two of you could explain to me exactly what's going on here.
Well, it's a little bit different. What they are saying in past years, what would happen is if you were a voter and you voted a provisional ballot, and Mark can tell us what that is because he knows better exactly what that is, but if you vote that, you have a green envelope in your ballot, you could designate a lawyer to come and represent you, and then you didn't have to show up.
And that's true for any case, pretty much, except a very severe criminal case.
Right.
I mean, civil case, you go in, you don't have to show up in court at all. The lawyer does all the work, and you can go and do your work, and the lawyer knows what's going on, and you, if you're not a lawyer, probably don't. That would seem to be a rational thing. In this case, Mark, did they change? Seems like they changed the rules in the middle of the game.
They certainly did. There was a rule last time where basically in Fairfax, lawyers could come in and represent you, as you said. But on the Friday after the election at noon, there was suddenly a decision where none of the folks that had voted could be represented by anybody unless they personally appeared. And so what we've had is a parade of voters coming in personally to plead their cases, when normally just signing a card designating an attorney, which is what we've had folks do in Fairfax, would be enough so that we could make whatever arguments and provide whatever evidence that would allow their vote to be counted.
Now, this is the kind of thing that makes me pull out my Constitution. And of course, the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution in a criminal case does protect your right to have counsel. But I've never heard, and we're all three lawyers here, maybe you have, I've never heard of a civil case other than small claims court, which would be an example of one where they refuse to let you have an attorney represent you. But I've never heard of any other civil case, after all voting is a civil matter, where they won't let you have an attorney represent you or you have to be there. Is there another case? I mean, is this thing legal?
I don't know that it's you know, they say it's legal. They've claimed that they consulted with an attorney general, somebody in the attorney general's
Who?
office.
Ken Cuccinelli, the guy, the Republican who lost the attorney general's
it
race?
was some, I don't know, an assistant
governor's
attorney
race?
or something. Not Ken Cuccinelli, but we know.
But
how
he
some
runs
of-
the department.
Well, he does, and we know that his assistants sometimes do not exercise the best judgment. For example, in getting siding against the landowners in Southwest Virginia.
How many people are we talking about here? I mean, I need to know whether this is a matter where it may be wrong, but of minor concern. There's 400 some odd provisional ballots. Is that right in Fairfax County?
There are, what, 493?
493.
Right.
Okay. So how many of them do we have people who want, have we contacted these voters? How many of them want to come in personally? How many of them want to be represented? I assume this is something that you folks would do for free. You would represent these voters. There'd be no charge to them for you to help them get their vote counted.
Well, absolutely. Originally, what took place was that the Democrat who was already in the room would represent the people who filled out these green cards that we would have designating FCDC to represent them in the provisional ballot meeting. And I believe there were somewhere between 60 and 70 folks who did that because they were walking out of the polling places and we noticed that they'd voted provisionally and they asked us.
Back up a bit, because I know what these are, but some of our viewers may not. Right. What is a provisional ballot?
Well, a provisional ballot is designed so that somebody who isn't quite certified as being a person whose vote would necessarily be counted has an opportunity to vote a ballot which can be adjudicated later by the County Board of Elections so that it can be determined whether they're a qualified voter or not.
So if I show up at a precinct and my name's not on the voting rolls because I moved from Reston to Vienna in the last year, I'm a Virginia voter, I have a right to vote, but they may not know, they may not have updated the precinct for me. Something like that?
Well, that is actually the number 2 reason we think, based on what we're hearing, for people
who've moved within Virginia.
Move within Virginia, move within Fairfax. You're just in the wrong precinct. And what you're trying to do is vote in the new precinct. Now there's a very, and Mark probably knows the details, but there's a sort of very complicated structure that says for a certain period of time, in certain cases, if you move, you can still vote in your old precinct. People who come and try and vote in their new precinct aren't on those registries, and they're not eligible to have their vote counted. There are other people.
They're not eligible.
No, my understanding.
Even though they've moved.
Even though they've moved.
You're supposed to go back to your old precinct.
In certain circumstances, for a limited period of time, you're allowed to do that. What you really need to do is file an updated registration form with the Board of Elections.
Right.
And then they update the form, you show up.
But the point is, you don't, if you haven't filed the updated form, you haven't gotten around to it, you don't lose your right to vote, you just can vote, you may vote in the wrong place.
You voted in the wrong place if you're voting at your new location.
Well, Mark, let's say I'm that guy. I moved from Reston to Vienna, and I tried to vote in Vienna, and they don't have my name on the voter rolls yet. And so then I would say, well, I live here. Here's my utility bill. I live here. Let me vote. And they would say, well, you're not on the voter rolls. We'll have you vote provisionally.
Well, typically what they would try to do is to get you to go back to your old precinct.
Okay.
So to make sure that your vote would be counted.
Because I think what you're saying is that if I move from Reston to Vienna, I can't vote in Vienna.
Right.
That's right. Even if you cast a provisional ballot, that probably would not be counted. But
what
perhaps.
What about the statewide races? I mean, okay, I can't vote for the local Vienna council, but I still am from Virginia, and why can't I vote in the Attorney General's race? That would be fair. That's what they do in California.
Unfortunately, Virginia doesn't have laws which allow you to cast a ballot in any precinct other than your own for any race.
For any race. Okay.
Right.
So in this case, so what would be some of the provisional ballots that you both have seen? You've looked at some of these. What are some of the reasons for these 493 people not getting a full right to vote?
Perhaps the most common one is folks who have been overseas and voting absentee ballots. And some of the absentee ballot applications continue from year to year. So you might have somebody in Afghanistan or somebody in England who voted their absentee in a prior year, but their ballot was sent over to Afghanistan after they've returned home. And the voter rolls would have been marked that they received an absentee ballot. And so they would have to vote provisionally so we could make sure that they didn't cast their vote twice.
But these people would be allowed to vote then. If they voted provisionally, their provisional vote would be counted.
Yes.
You know, this reminds. I have two friends who are Virginians who live in Austria, applied for an absentee ballot. They did not get one from the Fairfax voting. They called, they wrote, they applied a second time. They still didn't get a ballot, and this is the second year this has happened to them. They lost their right to vote. What should someone, just in the future, before we, I got to tell them.
You got to find out.
I got to find
friends.
out. What should you do when you request an absentee ballot and it just doesn't come?
Well, what you have to do is to make sure that that ballot arrives. You can.
How do you make sure it arrives when the officials aren't giving you your ballot?
If it's you're overseas,
Right.
they can send you your ballot by email.
Really?
And then you'll know that you've received it fairly quickly.
And then you can just print it out and take it to, I guess, the U.S. Embassy or something like that and cast your ballot?
Print it out and mail it back in the way that just you have to make sure that it gets back by election
See, my
day.
friends don't know that you could get a ballot by email. I will tell them that so that they know that for the next election because they didn't get their absentee ballot. All right, so number one thing is usually for people who are overseas and have come back home. That's number one reason. Out of the 493, what's that, 100, 200, 300? Give me a rough guess.
I don't know how many it is. Out of the
Half?
ones they've done so far, they have adjudicated 310.
Of the 493?
Of the 493.
Already?
As of 5 o'clock this afternoon when they finished.
So